So the World Cup might be over, South Africa might once again be the world champions, but what did we learn from the 2023 Rugby World Cup? I've had a little think about this. I've got a few things that I want to go through in the video. It's by no means a comprehensive list, so the comment section is where you can build upon the points I make, you can disagree with me, or you can throw some of your own ideas into the mix. But what do you think we've learned from the tournament? Let me know in the comment section. Also, if you enjoy it, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Welcome if you haven't already, but if you hit that subscribe button, then I massively appreciate it. But let's get into it. So as I say, welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Alfie, if you haven't been here before. Back firmly in the UK now over the last week or so. The dust settling on the Rugby World Cup. It was brilliant to be out in France for the majority of the tournament. I was back and forth a little bit, but I got to games most weekends. Fantastic World Cup, but is there anything that we can learn from it? And this is a pretty random list, I'm going to be honest. It's just things that struck me or stuck out to me reflecting on what we saw in France. So point number one, props need to scrummage. This is probably in particular because I'm English, right? And because once again, I saw an England team whether you'd say ultimately lose or certainly a major contributing factor to the reason that they got knocked out of the World Cup is because of their scrum. And South Africa having a set of props that can come on and absolutely dismantle them. England actually did pretty well for an hour of that semi-final, 50 minutes of that semi-final. Dan Cole, Joe Marler, the two best scrummaging props they had, stood up pretty well. Once the replacements came on though, for both sides, it was a very different story. And I think there's been a trend in rugby generally for all players to be upskilled, and that obviously is a good thing. You look at the players now, they have a far wider set of skills across all positions, I think, than at any other point during the game. Even if you look at other positions and you look in the centres, I think their demands over the ball in the jackal, just to give Jonathan Donty, for example, to use him as an example, the skill set across so many different positions has had to improve, and that includes the front row. I think we see front rowers now who have far better feet than many of their counterparts, say 20 years ago, much better hands. They do more over the breakdown. Everyone is better skilled, but it can come at a cost. And you can't get away from the fact that in particular for a position like scrum, which is in that scrum that is so specialised, you still need players that can do the business in the scrum because it can be such an important weapon. And actually, even if it's not as big a weapon as how we see the Springboks use it, it is still a part of the platform that you use for all other areas of your attacking game to work. So I think whilst it's great to have props that can do everything, I'm not complaining at all about the level of skill we see so many of these guys, but it's to not lose sight of what your main job is. And I think props need to scrummage. Point number two, and this is a question, return of the drop goal. Saw it on the opening weekend. I was there in Marseille, which was actually across the tournament, certainly in terms of the pool stages, one of the most enjoyable games that I was at, with the way England went about their business against Argentina. George Ford slotting drop goals from about 50 metres out. We saw Owen Farrell use the drop goal as well in that semi-final. Unbelievable drop goal against the Springboks before South Africa came back into it. Will we see a return of the drop goal? Now, I don't necessarily think we will. I would quite like us to, because I love it as a piece of skill. And I think it has been lost from the game a little bit in teams' desperation to score a try. But I just think, given what we've seen as well at this World Cup of how good the top sides are in the world at defending, sometimes sticking it back in the pocket for a drop goal is a great option. And actually, we saw South Africa in the final attempt quite a few, maybe a bit more speculative ones, which they weren't able to pull off. But I think the drop goal is a weapon that is often underused by teams. We see teams going through phase after phase after phase. Sometimes, when you're not really going anywhere, maybe the drop goal is a better option. I wonder whether we will see it. I'm not sure it's as transferable into club rugby as it is in the World Cup because of the nature of knockout games, and that's going to link on to my next point in a minute. So I don't know if we'll see it catch on. I would quite like it if we do, but yeah, I just thought that the drop goal at times as a way of building the score was impressive and important in this World Cup for certain teams, which leads me on to my next point, which is take the three. This is a little bit old-fashioned, and obviously the game situation will always dictate whether you go for the corner or whether you take the three. But I think there are quite a few good examples in this World Cup well, you just need to take the 3. And actually, maybe this does, again, link back to what I just said. Is this a product of knockout rugby? Whereas, again, across a whole league season in the domestic game, you'd say it kind of balances itself out. You're better going for the corner than you are always building a score. But I think there is something to be said by going 3-6-9, building the score, chipping away at the score if you're behind. And we saw it in quite high-profile games in this World Cup. Ireland, in the match that they ended up losing to the All Blacks, went to the corner early, maybe to their detriment. New Zealand in the final went to the corner early. Maybe that was a mistake. I know hindsight is a wonderful thing. We can all look at things after the fact and say, wow, they should have done this. But I just think sometimes, particularly in those very tightest games, definitely when it comes to knockout rugby, I accept maybe it doesn't quite work in a league structure, but even so, there is something to be said for taking the 3 and building the score. I think that for me is one of the big takeaways from this World Cup. But as I said in the intro and at the start of the video, down below is where you can let me know whether you agree with me or disagree with me. Final point for me, and the final thing, which I think is quite an important takeaway from this World Cup, the 4-year cycle doesn't really exist. In that, when it comes to the Six Nations, when it comes to 2024, we will start hearing this conversation of building to the next World Cup and it being a 4-year cycle, etc., etc. Whilst there's always going to be an element of looking to build towards the next World Cup, has this World Cup also not shown that it doesn't really matter? It doesn't really make sense? Look at New Zealand. A year or so ago, they were being dubbed the worst All Blacks team ever, but they were able to get themselves in a position in a short space of time to be 1 point or a couple of points away from winning the World Cup. If you want to even go back to 2018 and 2019 with the Springboks, South Africa, Rassie Erasmus comes in, the team not in a good position, they end up winning the World Cup a short while after. It's not all about the World Cup, it's not all about the 4-year cycle. I suppose on the flip side of that, you look at France and Ireland, who went through probably a more traditional 4-year cycle of starting in one place and building brilliantly to get themselves somewhere else, and then you end up losing at the World Cup. You can't put all your chips in that basket, possibly. I actually think there is a counter-argument to that, which I won't get into in this video. I think I might save that for later down the line. But France and Ireland fans have had a lot of good to celebrate over those few years, even though it didn't go as they would have wanted it to at the World Cup. So the talk of the 4-year cycle, is that a load of nonsense? Or maybe you're in the camp of actually look at a World Cup, look at what it means, look at the legacy that can be built from winning the sport's biggest prize, even though it only comes around once every 4 years. And that is why you should prioritise that 4-year cycle and prioritise the World Cup as well. So those are kind of some of my thoughts on the World Cup. Props need to scrummage. The return of the drop goal with a question mark. Take the 3. And the 4-year cycle doesn't exist. What do you reckon? Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of what those 4 points and what have you learnt from the 2023 Rugby World Cup. I look forward to reading your comments. A final reminder, like the video, that just gives it a little boost. It helps me out basically. And also subscribe to the channel. That is the #1 thing you can do. If you hit that subscribe button, then I've done my job and I'm happy. But nice one. I'll see you in the next one.